Good evening. Welcome to Township Board of Trustees meeting for Thursday, January 10th. Mr. Thomas, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Boy, we better be on our best behavior. We've got quite a crowd here tonight.
Yes.
And the township's unprotected.
Absolutely.
So, good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask for approval of the consent agenda and the regular agenda.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Support.
Okay, motion, support, any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have two items for discussion I would like to add to the agenda, please.
Which is,
The first one is Rose Best Solutions.
okay, you want to talk about that?
Yes.
Okay. Let's put that under operational issues. Ms. Lane?
In the past, I've heard that we don't add anything to the agenda. That was
Well,
when I had occasion.
Anything that we take, that we're going to take action on, we wouldn't, but if it's a discussion item, we can.
It's just only for discussion.
Is it to discuss what we talked about on Tuesday, or
Yes, an extension of that discussion.
what was the other one?
Executive meeting.
Our executive? Okay,
It's on there, right?
okay.
Mr.
All right.
Supervisor,
Yes,
I'd like to propose that we move some of the privilege presentation to the end of the meeting, so especially the recognition of the police force and the new appointees towards the very, very, very end of the meeting after the executive meeting.
yeah. Okay,
No?
No support.
Second.
No, it dies for lack of support, Mr. Massey.
we have the forms for recall right in the back of the room.
Oh, Scott.
Yes,
Vote.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes, I just want to mention one thing. I know that there was the resolution for the item B, item B. We did have a resolution back in last year where it wasn't supposed to come back to the board. And so that's probably, we don't need to have it on the agenda. We can let it die, like Mr. Lima just said.
So what Mr. Guzak is speaking of is that there was a resolution that Mr. Mansour made, everybody has a copy of it at their seat, that actually authorized the extension of the winter tax payment for residents without penalty to February 28th, and Mr. Mansour had made a motion last year to extend that indefinitely unless the board voted otherwise. So we actually don't need to have this resolution on the agenda. So we'll remove that unless somebody on the board is opposed. We'll remove item B under operational issues. Okay. All right.
Call for the vote for the consent
All
agenda.
those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, with that, we will move to our privileged presentation. And first up for our privileged presentation is the board will conduct the swearing in of Grand Blanc Township Police Department's new officer, Officer Zach Hummel. Please come forward and welcome. Good evening.
Excuse me. Good
Good
evening.
evening, Chief.
Pleased to be here tonight because, as you know, we've worked a long time, real hard trying to find candidates to fill our open positions. And I couldn't be more pleased with our most recent addition to our force, Officer Zach Hummel. He comes to us from the city of Davison. And what is unique about him is when he applied with our department, he had no police experience. He had very limited academy experience, but yet he shined above all other candidates who put in for a position with our department. I think that speaks volumes to the type of person he is, the type of officer he's going to be, and the quality of policing he's going to do in the township here, so we couldn't be more happy. That does not happen very often, where you have someone with zero experience perform as well as he did through our interview and hiring process, so kudos to you, congratulations on that. Prior to his law enforcement starting his career here, he's been in people positions. He's a people person. He understands the importance of customer service, providing a superior level of service to those that he is around. He was involved in a mentorship program at Dordt Federal Credit Union when he was worked there. He was refereed some soccer games, adults and kids, where he conflict resolution skills, which will serve him very well here. So we couldn't be more pleased. And with that, Clerk Lane, if you would please swear him in. And his mom, Amy, is going to come and pin the badge on him. So if you could please step up here as well.
What was worse with the soccer, the parents or the kids?
Okay, Officer Hummel, I've given you practice in this, and to his mother, I gave him 3 opportunities to back out, so he didn't. Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear and affirm that you will discharge the duties of police officer and follow the laws of the state of Michigan, the United States of America, and the township ordinances to the best of your ability?
I do.
Okay. You can make another mark in here.
Okay.
Not a big one.
Not a big one.
Thank you.
We have Band-Aids up here, just in case.
He has his vest on. I checked already.
Welcome aboard, Zeddy.
Welcome aboard, be safe.
And our next chief,
No, he's still the current chief,
Yeah.
not the next chief.
well, next on our agenda, Chief, would you like to bring forward our latest
I would.
individuals for promotion?
It is a good time for the police department. We are getting closer and closer to being to our budgeted and approved sworn officer amount. Officer Hummel is number 41, and we are currently approved and budgeted for 43. We are having backgrounds done on two candidates now, so you'll be hearing more about those candidates in the near future, we hope, assuming they proceed through our process. But with that, we need good men leading them and good people leading them. And we're fortunate enough to be able to conduct a couple of promotions here to help with that, help with their development, help with the growth of the department and the level of service that we can provide to our community and the residents in the Grand Blanc community. So with that, if I could have Bill Rennie please come up here. Bill Rennie has been with the department for 17 years. The last 4 years he's served as a sergeant with the Grand Blanc Township Police Department. During his time with the department, he has taken great pride in becoming a well-rounded officer, and that's what the goal is for every officer that we have, to make them well-rounded. He understands the importance of developing our staff and career development and making them the best they can be. Bill spent several years out at FANG, which is our Flint Area Narcotics Group in undercover capacity. He's also a valued member of our training team. Bill is one of our 3 DREs, a drug recognition expert. He also was an instructor, a DRE instructor, A-RIDE instructor, and SFST instructor. All those are components of detecting alcohol and impaired drivers. Certainly an asset to this department. We are looking for huge things from him in his new position as lieutenant. And to pin his new badge on him is his wife, Becky.
Fabulous.
Well deserved, honey. Well deserved.
You're making her nervous, though.
Congratulations.
Well deserved, man.
You're going to see a common theme amongst these promotions, that they're not just one-faceted or one-trick ponies. They are involved in several things, and they do several things very well. And that's a credit to those that were in front of them, you know, leading them at one time and developing them and making them better. Continuous improvement is important to the police department. We've, you know, we have a good department. We always strive to get better and better, and we keep trying to raise that bar on ourselves. And these promotions are going to allow us to do that. Can I have Josh Bellinger please come up? Now, some of you may have seen Sergeant Bellinger before. He has been promoted for a few months. However, we couldn't get him out here in front of you at the time because he also was, at the time, involved in the Flint Area Narcotics Group in an undercover capacity, and we certainly didn't want to jeopardize anything he had going in that capacity in time in his career. Josh has been with us for about 12 years, and he's been a sergeant with us for the past 6 months, roughly, 6-7 months approximately. Also a very well-rounded officer, tactically sound. When you think of a go-getter on the road, you think of Josh Bellinger. He's a go-getter. He isn't one that just sits out there and waits for things to happen. He goes finds things and just tries to stop them before they happen. Also a valued member of our training team, firearms instructor. Like I said, Flint Area Narcotics Group. He is going to be a tremendous asset. He's currently assigned to our night shift, so he's supervising all those night shift activities that go on out there. You know, whether it's our current, you know, larceny from vehicles, home invasion, subchecks, and leads the way in our OWI detection out there, primarily on third shift. So his wife, Michelle, is here to pin the badge on him.
I think he looks a little bit different than when he was with Fang, right?
And last, but certainly not least, can I have Todd Gilbert please step up? Todd's been a member of our organization for the last 18 years. The last 12 years, you can find him working very hard out of our detective bureau. He's going to bring some skills and experience to our sergeant's rank that we currently do not have. Like I said, the last 12 years he's been in our detective bureau and is a highly skilled investigator and has seen all sides of the criminal justice system here in Genesee County. So I'm looking forward to him being able to share that knowledge and expertise with our staff and the officers under his command there. Todd does a lot of stuff. If you want someone interviewed, he's your guy. He is tenacious in the interview room, and when the only thing that can put a case together is a confession, Todd is the guy you wanted in that room to get it. He's certainly an asset to that detective bureau. We are sorry to see him leave the detective bureau, but I am truly excited for the great things he's going to do on the road as a patrol supervisor, and I know he's going to have a positive impact, not only on our staff in the department, but the community. And if you didn't know, Todd also lives in our community, so he's a Grand Blanc Township guy. So with that, his girlfriend Angie here is to pin the badge on.
He was also the Police Officer of the Year for the Michigan State Elks Association.
And he's been a longtime member of like 14 years with our Grand Blanc Optimist Club, too.
Oh.
John Strong, next.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Good job, Chief.
Well, our police department is known for having the best, and we're keeping that tradition. We will in a minute. Item C, the board will consider a motion to approve my candidate. We have an unfortunate vacancy, which is Mr. Jay Johnson, or Joe Johnson, is resigning from the Planning Commission. And we have to first accept his resignation, and then we will also appoint his son, Jay. So,
Mr. Chair, I would be very proud for all the years I've known Joe from when he started to, with regrets, but wishing them the best, his resignation from the Planning Commission.
okay. In fact, please step forward, Joe.
The motion was not supported.
Support.
Thank you. So we have a certificate of appreciation presented to Mr. Joe Johnson, first, in recognition of your contribution to our community on behalf of the residents of the Charter Township of Grand Blanc. I offer our sincere thanks to you for helping make our township a better place for 20 years. So, I know you've lived here longer than 20 years, so you've been able to make it a better place for longer than that even. So, thank you for everything you've done for our township and for our community. Appreciate it. Thank you. And good luck in your retirement and all your future endeavors. Thanks, sir. Okay, appreciate it. And I think you're going to say a few words and introduce
That's all right.
our candidate.
Can't get rid of me that quick,
No,
right?
please.
Thank you.
It's probably one of the most difficult things I've done. Was Hill Road dirt when we,
No, it was a 2-lane highway with canopied in trees when we came.
it had ditches and it had
No.
horses and buggies and
Joseph.
I think. But anyway, wrote a letter, Scott, that I hope everybody got a copy of.
That was a very
diff-
nice
Very
letter, too.
difficult decision, but it's time to move on. You've got a master plan coming up. If I can take just a second, I want to tell you 20 years worth of quick thoughts about the Planning Commission. And then I'll refer back to a few of the board members, et cetera. 2000 was a unique year. We came in, we had a public symposium, if you will, called Vision 2020. And I kind of got hoodwinked into Vision 2020 by my wife, who wanted me to get on the Recreation Committee, which turned into the Economic Development Committee and the Finance Committee and a few other committees. And so that's how I got started. And then when an opening came up on the Planning Commission, I said, boy, that seems like a pretty good fit. What I didn't know was the quality of the individuals that we would be working with over the next 20 years. And that's a testament to the township. It's a testament to the quality of individuals we have here in Grand Blanc. And I think the best way, we call it a premier community. We've called it a premier community for a number of years. I'd actually like to think of it as a hallmark community. I think there's everything that we do, from design to work to play to lifestyle to business development, all works around a hallmark, a brand. And we have a brand. We need to name it, and we need to flaunt it so that we can continue to do things over the next 20 years. And maybe there needs to be a Vision 2040. Okay? One of the greatest things that we did, I think, while I was here was the involvement in the master plan. It certainly has given us a path, a working, living document that we can use to constantly move the community forward and help protect us when opportunities and/or challenges come along that could affect the vision that everyone has for the community. So we do visioning sessions in the master plan, et cetera, that position us to move the community forward based on what we hear from the community residents, business development leaders, the leaders of the community. And it's important for us to continue that process. I know you've got something on your agenda tonight, and that Dan, the chair of the Planning Commission, has been working on. The people in the Planning Commission have been outstanding. They've dedicated their time, their effort. As you know, it's not always easy to sit up there on emotional issues and follow the law, even when your gut tells you that, boy, I don't really like this, but it is the law. Then there are the good times where everybody's in agreement and everybody's looking forward to the future. Luckily, over the last 20 years, we've had a lot more good times than challenging times. But that's part of the job. The knowledge that you, as a board, allow the Planning Commission to gain is very, very important. Allowing people to go to the conferences, the MAP conference, every year I think we send now 3 people. That's invaluable. The Citizen Planner program is invaluable. There's no substitute for experience. There's also no substitute for new ideas and to communicate with your contemporaries across the state as to how they're doing things. So I applaud you for continuing those resource allocations because they're very important. The last one I attended was on solar energy, some different legislation that's taken place, some different counties that have been very proactive in that, Lapeer County for one, with solar farms and that kind of thing, and they're actually making money with their solar energy and helping the school districts. And so I've got information for that to pass on, but that's an aside. Time for me to go. 20 years is enough. Please, as you look to the future, realize and continue to realize how important the Planning Commission is for you. It's been a wonderful trip. I've enjoyed it immensely. And I tried best I could to keep costs down so that the next member of the Planning Commission, I think you only have to change a couple letters on the name plates.
Yeah.
So with that, if I could, I'd love to introduce my son. I think Jay is 6th generation through the school district. 5th or 6th? 5th generation through the school district. His kids are 6th generation through the school district. I had the honor of bringing him home to Blanc in 1979, and he's been here ever since. And so he's got his 20 years in or more too. But he has a great medical background. That's something that's going to be very helpful to the Planning Commission. You know, we talk about fire commission and that kind of thing. As we go forward in an aging population, it's going to be very, very important to have somebody on the Planning Commission that has the ability to and has worked in multiple communities with a medical background. And so his business acumen is phenomenal. His education resources are terrific. And he's got a lot more contacts than I do as far as getting things done. So with that, I'd love to introduce to you my son, Jay Johnson.
Do you want to say anything, Jay? Or?
No.
Yes, he does.
I think we have something. Kathy, I think, is getting something for you. I think. Right? You getting what I think you are, Kathy?
I'm going to get Joe's nameplate, because I already checked with Joseph the Fourth. And he doesn't want Joe.
He wants to.
Yes, and it's ordered.
I was just gonna put tape on it.
Well, that way you can take it home.
Thank you for your service.
Wouldn't there be an operational thing to put the name tags?
Yeah, well, we should take the time.
Congratulations.
I don't know. Thank you for all your support.
And, you know what, let's take a 5-minute break here.
Yeah.
And,
Leave him
and,
hanging?
what's that?
We're gonna leave him hanging?
Joe, Jay,
Stand there for a few
5 minutes
minutes.
sounds good to me.
you want to say a few words, Jay?
Sure. So-
Remember, you've got a motion hanging too.
Yeah, and let's, we got a motion to approve
Oh, yes.
that, so all those in favor say
Well, no,
aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Hold on, Kathy made the motion to accept his resignation, it needs a second?
I already seconded
You
it.
got it second, okay, so that's done.
Great, 5-minute break.
Well, Jay's going to say a few words.
And then you'll have to do a
Welcome
second
to-
motion
If
for
Ca-
approval.
To
I
appoint.
already seconded it.
Okay.
Jay.
Yes, I really appreciate the opportunity. Growing up in this community has been a privilege. Grand Blanc schools were great to me. They're great to my sisters. They're great to my kids. So having the ability to kind of dig into the future of the planning of the community is really exciting, and it's something that I'm really looking forward to. So thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jay.
you.
We appreciate your service. And also, just take a moment, I don't know if everybody knows all of our planning commission members, but we have 2 of them here in the room. We've got Dolores Coulter, if you could please stand, Ms. Coulter, and our planning commission chair, Mr. Gelling. So, so we appreciate it, and I know that we had Jay at the planning commission meeting this past week, so he was able to meet and be right at the beginning. So I think it's really exciting, a great time for Jay to come on board, because we're going to be starting, as you did, Joe, with master plan. And the master plan, Mr. Mansour spoke of it on Tuesday evening, that really is going to involve the community, as you said, that they had in the past with this Vision 2020, but I think the focus is really on getting community input. And your experience, Jay, that you bring, with working with so many different communities, with the logistics as well as medical background, I think is going to suit our township planning commission very well. So,
I hope so.
and being rooted here as well, 5th generation, and having kids that you want a community for your kids, worthy of them to live in. So, our community is premier, and I think that's why people move here. And you look at what how our community's grown over the past several years, and you think, gosh, who we appoint to this planning commission or ZBA is so critical to our future. And it's great when we can have people that are rooted in our community to serve on those committees. So we appreciate you volunteering.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would like the privilege, since I was here when his father came, to make the motion for Jay to be appointed to the Planning Commission.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Do we need a
Support.
second? Okay, it's seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? With that, let's take a couple of minute break and wish everybody well. And
There you go.
we're going to be back in 5 minutes. So, okay, thank you. Okay, we will call the meeting back to order. And we are going to have Clerk Lane swear in Jay Johnson as our newest member of our Planning Commission. So, Mr. Johnson?
And we're going to have his father, Joe, and his mother, Cindy, up here to witness it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which way do you want?
You can do it. Face me.
I guess there's a mattress laying out.
Or you know what? How about all
No.
three? How about you guys get on this side so Ms. Schmidt can get a picture of all 3 of you?
All righty. From one generation,
You got a big sign.
that's right.
Got to raise your right hand, Jay. Hey, Jay, you got to raise
Jay,
your right.
raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Michigan, the ordinances of Grand Blanc Township, and the laws of our Township Planning Commission, to serve as a planning commissioner to the best of your ability. You're going to sign here,
Did you take an oath for that?
right where I put that, right here, and I will fill it in. Thanks. Uh-huh. Pardon me? Oh,
There you are.
We didn't know that before we asked him.
Now it's official, man.
Welcome to the township, congratulations.
It's a 20-year commitment.
I knew. I didn't know there was a freaking mattress in 3 months.
Okay, so we had a great part of our agenda that we accomplished, and feel free to leave anytime you want to, so you don't have, our meeting might be a little bit lengthy tonight, but you're welcome to stay too. So
You ready, huh?
with that, we're going to, except for board members, we are going to now move to our citizen comments, and we'll start on the left side of the room, and if there's any residents here that would like to make a comment, please step forward. Otherwise, we'll go to the right side of the room. And then-
I'll be back so people in front of me can go first.
Okay.
I'm still the first one. Choose to be last. I'm trying.
Good evening.
Hi.
If you want to give us your name and address again, and you've got 3
Margaret
minutes.
Riley, 2417 Morton,
Okay,
Florida, Michigan, 48507.
okay.
I was asking about I don't know what it's even called now. It used to be a car lot down here next to Kickers.
Okay,
Okay, well, they have a topper down there and some other stuff. There's a van that's been sitting there. And I'm trying to like clean that up so it doesn't look so bad, but.
I'm
it's hard
sorry,
to-
there's a what there?
A topper, a truck topper.
Yeah.
It's frozen, literally. I tried dragging it to the curb and you can't do anything with it.
okay.
So the property's closed. I forget the
Yeah.
guy's name. I called somebody.
Well, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I was curious.
Okay,
Who's got that
go ahead.
church? Is that like an individual's church or?
I don't know, but tell us your list of concerns, and we'll direct you to the right place.
That was it. That's what
Okay,
I'm
all right.
asking.
What's your,
Actually, see the gentleman in the back of the room right there, and he can help you out on both.
Oh,
But I'd be careful removing things from people's property, though,
I
because,
wasn't removing it.
Oh,
I was
okay.
moving it. So I could,
All right.
I could blow.
okay.
Please.
All right, thank you very much. Okay. We'll move to the back of the room, and if there's anybody that wishes to make a statement or a comment,
I'll make your meeting be shorter this evening.
no, no. Come on, Ed.
okay, thank you very much. With that, we will move to approval of the minutes. And we had a change that we had made to the September 13th minutes, and those have been amended. So
I'll make
with
the
that,
motion to approve all 4.
Mr. Chair, I had a concern about.
okay, discussion, Mr. Massey,
I had a concern about December the 11th minutes.
the December 11th,
I think it was December the 11th, the ones where, the director came.
It was the 11th.
The 11th, okay, the 11th meeting.
Okay.
It wasn't documented in the minutes that Kay said that she was retiring, last year.
okay. You see a place where we can insert that, Mr. Massey, or
Yes.
what would be the statement, and where would you want it placed?
Well, as,
Ms. Lane?
Ms. Lane, wrote the minutes, she can insert it at the appropriate place.
Okay,
Okay. Would you like it? I sent you information where she is retiring this
No,
year
no,
in
no.
2019.
No, no. I thought I made myself clear at the last meeting, Tuesday's meeting, that she stated she was retiring in 2018.
oh, that
That's
she
what-
said, I'm retiring this year?
That
That's
was
what
on the
she
tape.
said.
That's exactly what she said.
In response to Mr. Mansour's question about the 2019 and why the wages were being reduced in 2019. And I sent each of you.
Well, I can read you the email you sent from the recording. It was this year. She sent it in December of 2018. That's that year, not next year. This year that she was living in, December of 2018.
Well, let's do this because,
The email that you sent out, you put in parentheses.
yeah. Can we do this? Can we, because I would rather approve minutes that we can actually visually see. And if we need to amend the December 11th meetings, Mr. Laddie, would be acceptable to hold off till our next meeting?
Sure.
And Mr. Massey can submit, and will you send an email with where you want that inserted, or you would like to have it inserted?
Absolutely.
Okay. and then we
Supervisor
will-
Bennett?
Yes.
Would Trustee Atkins be willing to amend his motion to include just the three, December 13th, 21st, and September 13th?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm so,
And who seconded?
Support?
Okay. So there's a motion to accept the meeting minutes from December 13th, 21st, and 13th. And it's been seconded. Any discussion on those? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yeah, on the December 11th meeting minutes, Mr. Massey will make whatever changes he's
Yes.
suggesting and send those to Ms. Lane,
Yes.
and we'll look at those for consideration at our next meeting. Is that acceptable? Okay, we've already accepted the consent agenda items, and we will move to future positioning. And on Tuesday, we discussed the MGT Consulting Group, the allocation study that is going to be presented on the 22nd. And we've asked Mr. Limita and Mr. Laddie to do a SWOT analysis or a pros and cons of two of the possible directions that we could go in. We already have a SWOT analysis pretty much on how we've been doing things for the last 9 years. But we're going to analyze intergovernmental agreement. And then also number 3 was basically selling the city services. So we're going to investigate those two. And on our meeting on the 22nd, we will review with MGT their findings of the study, and we will talk about the analysis. Mr. Laddie?
No, you're exactly right, and again, with Mr. Limita and I working on this, I think we'll have some information to you regarding our thoughts before your meeting on the 22nd, and then the timing of when you take those up will be totally up to you.
Okay. But our timing is basically April 1st is when we want to have our decision made on where we're going, right?
Well, that's correct. Yeah, ultimate decision by April 1st.
Yeah, by April 1st, because April 1st, we need to be ready to roll, right? We want to be ready to start ordering trucks. And
Supervisor?
Mr. Mansour?
Supervisor Bennett? I would like to make a request to the MGT group. After going through the report, it was clear that they made a recommendation on the allocation of the expense on a percent basis of the overall expense of the fire department, but it seemed to apply more or less, mostly to the operating expense, and I didn't see a kind of dollar figure that would roll in both the operation and the capital expense.
Oh, capital too.
Yeah, so if we would have a kind of a number based on the allocation that would include both those.
We had a discussion with them on that, Mr. Limita and I. Mr. Limita?
And they did expect that number would apply to both operations and capital. And their capital recommendation, I think what we can do probably is put a dollar amount in there so that you kind of see what that looked like.
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay.
And it also depends on how we end up going with things. Okay, anything else on that issue, Mr. Limita, that we need to discuss this evening?
No, I'll update the board. I did receive an email late last night from Gordon Stryker from MGT, just to forward that he had gotten a couple from the city manager requesting that MGT do a presentation at the February 13th meeting for the city on the cost allocation study. And I think he was asking me how to proceed. As part of our original agreement, they were going to do a presentation I did say that the amendment that we agreed when we brought the city on and they paid a portion, the 20% portion, we've lived up to all of the options that we had in there that we needed to live up to. So they're under no obligation to do that. I mean, if they want to, fine, but they're under no obligation to do so. I have already invited the city once before through email to make sure they were here for the 22nd if they wanted to hear the presentation, and if they want to submit their questions in advance to MGT to be answered. I reaffirmed that today with the city manager, just let her know that we welcome the city council and hope that they'll be in attendance to hear the presentation so that we're all working off the same information. She responded back that they don't typically meet on Tuesdays, they only meet on Wednesdays, so that they wouldn't be available, or some wouldn't be available. And I did remind her that we put ours on YouTube immediately after the meetings, and that anyone who wasn't able to attend would be able to see the entire presentation on YouTube. Hopefully we've issued them a warm welcome. We asked them to submit their questions in advance, and they'll be in attendance to hear the presentation on the 22nd.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lemata.
So, I'm sorry,
Mr. Thomas?
Superintendent Limited, does that mean that MGT is not gonna do the presentation in February for the city?
I can't say. I didn't hear back from Mr. Stryker on that. I just told him that as far as I was concerned, that we were the client on the contract, and they had their presentation on the 22nd will have completed all the requirements that we had paid for and required as part of the agreement.
Okay, thank you. And again, we ask all our board members that have any questions to submit those in advance. Item C, the board will consider a resolution to adopt the 2019 federal poverty guidelines for residential property tax property exemptions for the 2019 property assessments.
So moved.
Wait a second.
We did
Support.
skip A, but you can
We
go ahead
skipped
with
A.
this. And
He just skipped to C, that's okay. I mean, he can go back to A and B, it's not
I
a big deal.
apologize.
As long
Let's
as
go
he-
back to A.
as long as we go
No,
back.
it's too bad, there's already supported, I already made the motion.
Doesn't mean we have to continue with it.
I was covering for you, Supervisor.
Okay, there's been a motion. Is there
Support.
support?
I don't.
It's a resolution.
It's a resolution.
Mr.
Okay, Ms. Lane?
Supervisor, I don't.
Go ahead and call the
didn't
roll.
catch- I don't know who made the motion and supported it.
Mr.
Thomas?
Thomas made the motion.
Mr. Mansour made
Mr. Mansour made
Support.
Thank you,
second.
gentlemen.
I would call for the resolution.
Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, I apologize for skipping.
I thought you did it on
Item
purpose
A.
to make sure we were following along.
Well, I may have. The board will consider a resolution from the Rosenwald Harlenites, Mid-Michigan, to recognize as a nonprofit organization for the purpose of obtaining charitable gaming license.
So moved.
Support.
Okay, any discussion? Thank you, Mr. Williams, for your great work in our community, and we look forward to successful events.
Thank you so much, I really appreciate your support. I just need one quick question. When can you get a copy of
When can you get a copy of the signed document?
Yes, I have to get it to the state, so
I know you do. And
Probably
so
right after the meeting.
I've got it right here if you'll wait till the end of the meeting.
I'll be here.
I have something to fill in. I have a couple things to fill
Hey,
in on.
take your time, I'm here for the
Thank
evening,
you.
so thank
Okay,
you.
all those in
Thanks
favor
again.
say aye.
Resolution?
Resolution, so Ms. Lane?
Yes. Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Myself, and Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, item D, the board will consider a motion to accept the recommendation of the Planning Commission toward the master plan update proposal to Beckett and Rader Incorporated, and authorize Township Superintendent to negotiate and execute the contract for services not to exceed $39,235.
So moved.
Support?
Okay, there's motion and support. Any discussion? And we have the chair, Mr. Gellings, here this evening. Do you have any comments, Mr. Gellings? We had Mr. Lloyd speak a little bit last night about the plan.
I wasn't really intending to say anything, but the interview process was an interesting one for us. It was based on the initial proposals that were submitted, Beckett and Raiders seemed to maybe come up above the other one. Then when we interviewed, we really felt that they were very strong and were the best for Grand Blanc Township. And I actually found myself getting excited, enthusiastic, that I think that they're going to do a good job for us.
Very good. Well, and again, we appreciate all the work the Planning Commission does for us. So, great job on the interview process, and we're looking forward to starting the master plan. So with that, there's been a motion and it's been seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, a few future,
Operation it should be.
what's that?
Operation it should be.
That was stricken from the agenda. We don't need to do that.
Rose?
Okay, we actually, Mr. Massey asked that Rose Pest Solution, that we have a little bit continued conversation on Tuesday's discussion with regard to the Pest Solution contract for mosquito abatement.
Mr. Chair, after Tuesday's discussion, I went back and reviewed the package.
It's a little bit hard to hear you a little bit in the microphone, I don't know.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
After Tuesday's discussion, I went back and reviewed the package, which I
Okay.
always do that for this meeting, to be ready for this meeting to vote yea or nay.
Sure.
So as I was reviewing the package, I discovered there was a contract there. And I only saw two names on the contract. It's Clerk Lane and Supervisor Bennett. And so I had a concern. So my question to the board, to Clerk Lane, who wrote the contract?
Contracts are written by our attorney, and those contracts have historically been the supervisor and the clerk to make sure that they are, two people sign things, just like Mr. Guzak and I signed the checks.
So based on what you just told me, the way I'm interpreting what you just said, the
Yes,
attorney wrote the contract.
I was involved in the writing of the original contract, and you have a copy, or at least I have a copy of the agreement that was signed back in April of 2015 that is identical to the contract that you were presented with, that extends from April 19th to the 22nd. I did not insert those numbers or those dates into this contract, but I was involved in the original contract. And by the way, I think the original contract predates even the one that was adopted in 2015. All the terms have stayed the same, but the numbers were different. But I didn't put those numbers in, if that's your question.
So the 2015 contract you did write, but
Yeah, and, well, I don't know if it was 20, we didn't reinvent the wheel each time this came around, but
Okay.
I was involved in the main part that I was interested in, obviously, is the liability and insurance part. But yeah, the contract is only, there's just a change in dates and a change in dollar amounts, and I think that happened actually in 2015 as well. So to answer your question, I was involved in the creation of this agreement, but I was not involved in its update.
But it appears this discussion is very important because you're the legal counsel. I'm not. It appears if something does occur and there's a liability, this board is responsible. Now, it would be very much embarrassing if we learn in a courtroom or prior to going to court that the attorney basically had nothing to do with the contract. It was the clerk.
Well, that's, in fairness to the clerk, she forwarded to me the 2015 agreement that expired in 2018 and said, this is the same agreement, the numbers have changed slightly, let's get this ready for the board. And I didn't, and for whatever reason, we didn't reconnect, but the clerk went ahead and inserted the newer dates and the new amount, so.
But I guess attorney and Clerk Lane, what I'm driving at, where I'm going with this, if I'm wrong, correct me. In the first place, the clerk should not have had anything to do with the contract. That's my understanding. We discussed this Tuesday night, that should have gone through the superintendent. That's my
Correct.
point.
And we discussed that, and hopefully that'll be the case. Ms. Lane?
To this board, I want everybody to understand that Mr. Limita was incorrect in a statement that he made, that he said, I just put the contract on the O drive for the meeting tonight. I have all of my emails to document that on December 4th, Rose sent me the 2015 contract, marked out the amounts and the dates. That was all they changed, which I sent to Attorney Laddie, to Dennis Limita, to Scott Bennett, and to Earl Guzak at 2:27. At 2:48 on 12/4, Mr. Limita said he didn't want it on the December agenda, he wanted it on the January agenda. At 2:50, Mr. Laddie said he would get the contract ready. I notified Rose, based on that it would be on January. On December 5th at 1:08, I sent the contract to Mr. Laddie. On January 2nd, Dennis Limita, Attorney Laddie, Mr. Bennett were sent a copy of the attached contract and reminded that it was on the agenda for January the 10th. And then I reminded Rose that they were going to be on the agenda on the 10th. And I have all the minutes to prove I did not change any policies. I directed these things when I got them. And I want the record straight so that, Mr. Massey, you don't keep challenging what I am trying to do.
I'm not, Clerk Lane, I'm not challenging what you're trying to do. We are at risk. You are not at risk. What I'd like to challenge moving forward, if the superintendent doesn't mind this, I'd like to give a list of all the things that Clerk Lane is responsible for. In other words, what is Clerk Lane's duty? To me, it appears very clear to me, I'm speaking from my point of view, that you have overstepped your boundary. We have the superintendent should be responsible for that. That's his duties, not your duties.
Excuse me, I just told you what happened on December the 4th, starting when I got the notice from Rose that they needed their contract agenda, their contract amended, and I sent it per
I'd like to ask
your
Mr.
instructions,
Limita.
and I have the emails to prove it.
Mr. Limita?
So I think, just for clarification purposes, so the issue is, as operations manager, it does need to come to me. And if you read the emails that you're talking about December 4th, the negotiations were over. It said, Clerk Lane, here's the changes that you need to make on your contract. Somewhere that should have come to me before then.
That's the first I got it or knew anything about the contract.
Then
I know they talked to
Ms.
you in
Lane,
August.
let Mr. Limita speak, please.
So the issue, then we'll put it back to Rose and say, then I'm not sure why they just assumed that these were the changes that we were going to negotiate in the contract, move forward, and they sent them to you. And that's a pretty big assumption on their part. Again, when we were putting that together, that was the last meeting of December. We were approving the budget and everything else. So why was it moved forward? Is because when we looked at it, we didn't have the contract complete. They sent it. It was already pre-negotiated, and it was like, here, put this on the agenda. And I said at that time,
It wasn't pre-negotiated, it was what I received from them.
And
you
that's what I just said.
called
I said, then we need to have that conversation with Rose Pest Solutions.
Right, and you had called them about the budget to find out what you needed to put in the budget for 2019 in August or something.
July.
And I'm just saying, I don't appreciate the attack I'm getting when I got the information, I sent it to you. And I think what is the problem here is, before we had a superintendent, the clerk is the person in the municipalities that get these things and forwards them on to other people, which I did.
Well, I would ask that if there's any contracts that are to this board's to consider, or any negotiations, regardless of what it is, that those phone calls, emails, correspondence of any type, because even today, I had an email exchange with Clerk Lane that actually it started with, let's see here.
I got an email this morning from Rose manager who was going to be here tonight to make his annual presentation.
Right.
I introduced him, and I didn't know, but when I introduced him, thinking that Mr. Limita didn't know him, they knew each other,
Well,
and
let me
we agreed
finish
to
what I
put
was.
it off.
So Mark
getting-
Lucero, the local manager for Rose Pest Solution, emailed you
This morning.
earlier today and said that, you know, I'm not sure what he told you, but you emailed Dennis and I saying that he will be at the meeting to update the board tonight. And Mr. Limita said they're not on the agenda, and, you know, Mr. Lucero should have been directed to him. I told you that this was discussed at length at Tuesday's committee of the whole meeting, and you were instructed to send all calls and correspondence to Mr. Limita. And you said, well, it was an email. And so I emailed back, well, emails are considered part of correspondence as well. So I would just ask that any communication with regard to contracts that the township's going to enter into, whether it's lighting contracts with, because we've had this issue with Consumers Energy also, that lighting contracts, that garbage contracts, that you know, the mosquitoes, you know, abatement program, anything operational other than elections needs to go to Mr. Limita.
And
So
I
with
am
that-
clarifying again, within an hour, he got, and you did, and Mr. Laddie, within an hour of my getting that contract, seeing it for the first time, it was forwarded to
Okay.
you on December the 4th.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
One question. How do we move forward with the existing contract that has not been signed? I assume it has not been signed yet.
Well,
But
I
it
think
only has
you
your
know,
two
what we
names.
decided was that Mr. Limita and Mr. Rogers, that was here on Tuesday, are going to discuss that contract, and I believe Mr. Laddie, but you know, part of the concern with doing a one-year contract is that right now, it looked like about a 5% increase over a 4-year span. If we go 1 year at a time, I doubt that we're gonna just see a 5% increase
I looked at
over the next 4
numbers,
years.
it's like 10% increase.
So I think, you know, we have Mr. Limita in charge of our operations for a reason. He negotiates many contracts that are even more significant than the mosquito abatement. He negotiates our contracts for employment with our unions, with a variety of areas, with legal counsel if needed, and I trust him to work on this as well. So I think, Mr. Limita, your plan is to come back to us on the 22nd, am I correct?
Yes, and just to update the board, I did verify what Mr. Rogers told us on Tuesday evening. There is only one other company that can handle a municipality from a mosquito abatement standpoint. And I left a phone message and an email yesterday. I have not heard back from them as of yet. I also verified that there are other municipalities that they're doing in the area. In fact, I talked to Gaines Township yesterday, who signed a contract 2 years ago with that other company, so I know that they are doing it in other areas. They were based out of Fenton. Hopefully they'll get back to me. I'll try to reach out to them again tomorrow, but we'll try to see how quick we can get it together. I intend to do one-on-one interviews with them about what they would offer, the services they offer, to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples with what Rose Pest Solution does, and I know it's a very short time frame, but I hope to have it to the board for the 22nd.
Okay. Mr. Thomas?
I have 3 questions, and I don't really care who answers them between.
With regard to the
Super
Rose
and-
Pest Solution?
Yes. I don't care who answers it between Clerk Lane or Superintendent Laddie. My first question is.
Superintendent Limita, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, Superintendent Limita.
Glad you
My
I'll
question
you
is
ask
in
him,
the-
and I'll direct who answers them.
Okay. I would like to know who was contacted for the November meeting, from when Rose contacted somebody to set up their November meeting when they came in, and did their presentation in November. I'd like to know that. I'd like to know who, if Rose sent this information, or if this information was requested by somebody and Rose responded. And the third thing is I'd like to know who put the dollar amounts in the current contract.
Well, we'll start with Mr. Lemata since he's in charge of operations. Mr. Lemata?
I believe the answer to those questions would be Clerk Lane.
Ms. Lane?
I didn't insert the numbers for the current contract came from Mark Rogers at Rose, and I sent them to everybody that I have mentioned. This report came this morning. Mark Lucero, who's the manager, does an annual report to the board, and he's been out of town. He sent this morning. He was prepared to make a presentation of the annual report for 2018. It's hundreds of pages. It's something he provides to the township. I made the first page of every report so this board would know what kind of reports they are, and I'm prepared to send the whole email of 8 different reports to any board member that wants it.
So I guess to piggyback, my question is, did you request this information or
No.
he just emailed it?
He just emails it.
Just tell me that you told him at that time, please send your emails to Superintendent Laddie.
I'm sorry I didn't. I just made these copies and I was doing minutes
Okay.
for
That's all I wanted
Tuesday's
to know.
minutes.
I think, you know what,
But I did introduce Mr. Lucero again, but he already knew Dennis and I didn't know that. But he showed up tonight. I introduced him and told him he was to email and call Mr.
thank you.
Lemata.
I think, you know, I don't believe anybody's attacking anybody here. I think what we're trying to do is play by the rules we've set up from the very beginning, which is Mr. Lemata is in charge of daily operations, and that when we see that not happening, it's very difficult for me to hold Mr. Lemata accountable when we have board members that are holding some of the cards or responsible for certain outcomes. And if we're going to be able to hold Mr. Lemata accountable, he needs to be in charge of everything and have the authority, and if he's given the responsibility. So I think, you know, hopefully when somebody like Mr. Lucero contacts you, you will, you know, email him back, or whether it's in writing or whether it's by phone, just politely direct him to Megan Gilman, the administrative assistant for Mr. Lemata, and ask, you know, that they contact them. If it's email of reports, forward the report to Mr. Lemata, and it's not your concern, it's Mr. Lemata's concern at that point, whether he wants to put it on the agenda. If it doesn't get put on the agenda, then the board will hold him accountable for that. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to say something about the attack. If I ask the question, it's always attacking Clerk Lane. But Clerk Lane is the involved party. So therefore, who should I ask the question to? Everybody says, oh, you're attacking Clerk Lane. You mean we come to a board meeting, we cannot ask the board member a question without the board member assuming that he or she is under attack or being attacked?
One thing that I would ask board members to do, and we really didn't probably address this when we first started out 2 years ago, but one of the things we can do is address questions to the chair. And then the chair, you know, so for example, if Mr. Mansour has a question of Mr. Guzak, Mr. Mansour addresses his question to me, and then I ask Mr. Guzak to respond. And that way we don't get into this back and forth between board members if there's an issue that gets to be a hotly contested item.
Yeah.
So that's what I would suggest, is that questions be addressed to the chair, and then, does Mr. Laddie, is that appropriate?
Yes, sir.
It just, I think, would help the boardroom to make sure people get their answers and maybe help things. Ms. Lane?
Mr. Chair, I brought up what happened in December because an a mistake was made by the superintendent, saying that I just put this contract on the O drive, and I felt I hadn't, and I thought the board needed to see. I have the emails to prove, when I got it, within an hour, it had been sent to Mr. Limita. And that he looked at the contract, he could see it, and said it's gonna go on January, and I just let he and Attorney
heard-
Ladder do
we-
it. So that is why I brought this up tonight.
We heard that, but we also heard that it appeared that it had been already negotiated when Mr. Limita received it.
But I
with that, I think we're ready to move on to a new issue.
I never
But-
had any discussion.
Okay, and if it's new information, let's go ahead, but if it's not, then let's move on. Mr. Thomas?
Okay, it seems like we really waste a lot of time and energy on this. Why
On what?
can't,
On this?
on overstepping our bounds getting into operations? I think what I would like to see happen, Mr. Chair, is that we have job description, and your job description, anything out of it goes to superintendent.
We have that. It's called Michigan statute,
Right.
and that
Well,
little red book.
Right.
Well, obviously, I've seen it. You made copies of it last month with the
Right.
prior month before. We all received a copy of it.
Correct.
But yet we still have people answering phone calls for garbage and phone calls for lighting and phone calls for the pest solutions and such. Can't we just stop it? Shouldn't those just be directed to Superintendent Limita's personal assistant, Megan Gilman? I mean, enough's enough. I
yeah.
mean, no more.
Well, one of the things on the agenda coming up is with regard to our policies, and I would like to
Well, that shouldn't
make
be
it
a
even more
policy,
clear, but
Chair.
I mean, we've covered this numerous times, and it is getting frustrating to continually address this, and
Well, just stop. I mean, it's as easy as yes, no. You're not in charge of garbage. You're not in charge of phones or blah. May I, through you to Superintendent Limita, you've worked in a lot of different municipalities and you're trained to do this. Isn't this? We all have lines of demarcation, and enough's enough of overstepping our lines. And wouldn't this just be end black and white situations? There's really not gray here, is there? Or am I just totally missing something?
No, I think you're right. I think it's, everybody understands what an operational issue is, and what statutorily has been assigned to me from the statutes, and what's assigned to you guys as board members, what's assigned to anybody else. I think the job descriptions are pretty clear, pretty clear. So yeah, I mean, operational issues, we're in a township that everybody wants to help out, and we certainly understand that, appreciate the help, but sometimes that can muddy the waters, whether you want to know, especially outside agencies, the road commission, Consumers Power, whatever, that they know who the point of contact is, because if you lose that, you start to lose, they don't know who they're contacting when there's some information going on, so it's important, and I appreciate that.
Mr. Atkins?
Just, maybe I'll offer just one bit of advice. So, I've experienced this sometimes within my company when we make an acquisition. And you pick up another manufacturing site, and then you have a bunch of overlap of people doing other things, or some miscommunication with vendors or suppliers. I'd recommend maybe, since it seems isolated to just a few of them, maybe some sort of an email or an org chart to those vendors, letting them know that going forward, this is how we do business, and it goes through you, Mr. Limita.
And we have had the conversation with a number of the road commission, and we specifically told them who should be contacting you, and made it clear to this board that Jeff Sears and myself are the contact. But not a bad suggestion, Mr. Atkins, and I'll get with Mr. Limita, and perhaps that might work. Okay. Next item on the agenda. Let's see here. We had, you want to talk about the executive committee?
Yes.
Or executive meeting, or?
Yes. I was up here at the Township Hall, and one of the residents came in and we had a conversation, and the residents asked me, why you don't attend the executive meeting? I said, I don't know. I've never been asked to attend. I said, I always thought the executive meeting was for superintendent staff people. That's what I thought it was for. The supervisor and the superintendent, they meet with the staff people. That's what I thought it was for. So now I feel as though that I have been left out of the meeting. No one has ever asked me to attend an executive meeting. So why is that?
Well, let me just clarify, there's a few different meetings that occur during the week. One of the meetings Mr. Limita holds with his department heads, and basically their focus has been on, building a team here. And we hold Mr. Limita accountable for a lot of things, and so he meets with his leadership team, which is his department heads. And so that goes on a weekly basis. Is it weekly, Mr. Limita, or every?
Bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly. The other meeting that I think it started long before I was elected supervisor, but I think it started back when the previous supervisor was filling in for, well, we had a departure of the superintendent, and Miss Hoffman filled in as the superintendent, or the supervisor.
It even began before that.
Predates her? Okay.
It was before we had a superintendent in Grand Blanc Township. When we decided to transition to the superintendent, and the supervisor's position became part-time, at that time there was a desire to have, for me to attend meetings with the then newly hired superintendent, which was Dick Dunnell. Mr. Dunnell didn't come from within in the township. We hired him. He was at Bridgeport. He had experience in Bridgeport. He had experience in other communities, but not in Grand Blanc. And so that was the idea of that, was to have a weekly meeting with he and I to kind of get him up to speed, get him familiar with the operations of the township. And then is that, and what happened then is we also had attendance from Supervisor Hoffman, but also I think Mr. Guzak began to attend, and then the clerk's office began to attend as well. But that was it. The purpose of those, from my perspective, was to bring our new superintendent up to speed. It also, though, it had evolved into a situation where we met weekly with whoever happened to be in the superintendent position. Mr. Dunnell was here for a while, and then Mr. Edwards filled in, and then Ms. Hoffman added additional duties when Mr. Edwards was not here. And it turned out to be a way to communicate information on a ground level, really, between the supervisor's office, the clerk's office, and the treasurer's office, and with my legal assistance. It's not meant to be a policy meeting. It's meant to be a Q&A, really. And it was really it originated as sort of a tutorial for the new superintendent. As we find ourselves here today, we have an experienced superintendent, we have an experienced clerk, and an experienced supervisor and treasurer. And so those meetings, they should never turn into policy, because even though it's not a quorum of this board, that's not the purpose of it. Right. The purpose of it is to handle day-to-day operations and questions. And if you want to explore, because again, you guys are well seasoned and understand exactly what's going on. If those are making anybody uncomfortable, or if you feel they're counterproductive, then say the word.
Well, I think, what I believe that we can do at this point, I understand, first couple of years, or first year Mr. Limita was on board, is just bringing him up to speed probably with some of the things going on, but he's actually served as our superintendent longer than some of our board members at this point. So I'm confident that he knows how things operate here. And past meeting, we had a specific agenda item and had the meeting for that specific agenda item. But I in no way want the executive meeting to circumvent our board discussion. And I think what's appropriate for the executive committee meeting is, if there's a specific agenda item, then we'll meet and discuss that. And it might be something along the lines of perhaps our minutes. And I mentioned that Mr. Laddie and I and Ms. Lane are going to meet with regard to that. And that may happen in an exec meeting, that we do that.
Supervisor Bennett?
Yes.
Just as a suggestion, maybe it would be worth jotting down a few notes about the guidelines for the executive meetings that would kind of scope out the types of issues to be addressed and exclude policy, but really it's an operational issue, alignment between this board's policy and the staff.
Right.
And a good example would that be this Rose Pest Solution meeting every Tuesday.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure we're gonna meet every Tuesday, but Mr. Atkins?
I'd like to, also part of that policy, understand who is part of the executive team or meeting. If it's issues that are addressed internally in terms of minutes or something like that, you know, I think that's reasonable. But if we're having executive meetings that are opened up to outside boards or commissions, we're really the executive team. And I think that we should really know what's going on in terms of that, or just not do it.
And I think part of, you know, my concern in having the meetings is making sure that our one operations person, which is Mr. Limita, is getting the support that he needs, and that and if there's areas where we're stepping over the bounds, just as if we had staff members that were getting involved in board business, I think Mr. Limita would be the first one to go to his board, to his staff member or department head and say, hey, you're getting involved in board issues, this isn't yours. I feel the same responsibility for board members that are getting involved in staff or operation issues. And so I think that's what I saw the purpose of the meeting partly when we first started, but I think at this point everybody knows what the ground rules are in terms of what's operation and what's board. And I think at this point those meetings should merely exist if there's a particular item that we need to get some clarification between, you know, what's treasurer business or operations. But I have a concern too. I want to make sure that what's board business is discussed here, and there's no need for a pre-board meeting, so to speak, maybe. So, Mr. Atkins?
Just one more add. I think part of it is the term, at least for me, staff versus executive meeting. So I think executive meeting implies a little more, at least for me. A staff meeting, I have no problem with. I mean, it's part of operations and part of what you do. I think when you add the term executive meeting, then it implies something above and beyond what our duties and roles are here is happening without us being part of it. So I think it raises a lot of questions that don't need to be brought up. So.
And I think that Mr. Mansour brings up a very good, valid point that as we look at our policy meeting, I think outlining when, you know, what issues would be pertinent for the treasurer, clerk, supervisor, and superintendent, and our legal advisor to meet. What do those issues consist of? And that would be fine by me to have the policy. Ms. Lane?
I would like to, having worked in other municipalities and knowing other municipalities, I know that township supervisors, city managers would make regular bullet point notes, memos to the elected officials saying they went to such and such a meeting and just giving a highlight. And those were done either on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, so that all of these outside meetings were simply more accounted to, and you had a better idea of what was going on in the community that functioned in relationship to your community. And so those are standard things that other communities do on a regular basis, and we've never asked for anything like that here. And I think it's something we should also consider.
Okay, anything else? The next on the agenda is the board reports. I don't know, well, I guess future agenda items, we covered those on on Tuesday as far as event committee consideration and the investment committee meeting. Yeah, Ms. Lane?
Mr. Chair, putting them down as a future agenda item is a thought. But I think that when we're starting new committees, and one that you had started in November was Records Committee.
Retention? Yes.
And the committee wants to meet, and I'm going, I don't know why you want us to meet or what your direction was. I sent you an email back in December. I still don't know what your direction is. So when we're introducing new committees, the intent sounds good, but it's not giving us any direction as to its purpose or whatever. And so I think.
Well, the event committee would be to plan events.
Right, but I'm just saying, if we have a
So
little bit more
until we have the
direction
committee,
to them.
when we have the committee, then they'll form some direction. But it will be to plan events here in the township, and they'll bring their ideas, or we'll bring their ideas to the board, and then we'll go from there. As far as the record retention, we've met with Mr. Limita on what I have anyways, on what our in-house record retention is that statutorily we're required. And I think Mr. Massey, I've talked with him, and he has several suggestions on where we start. So I think we could schedule a meeting probably.
Well,
I think we're waiting till after. Yeah, but I
So
think after the holidays, I really didn't want to try and meet around the holidays, but I think we can meet, and I think we have a list of things we want to see where they're at and if we have them. I think what we want to do on the record retention is actually start with the most recent time period in the past 2 years and just take a look at how we're keeping all the resolutions that we've passed, so that if somebody wants to come in and see all the resolutions, that they're in a specific location, things of that nature. So we can get started on that. The investment committee meeting, we're going to schedule that very shortly. I think we need to get with everybody briefly after the meeting tonight just to get a couple of dates. And also, we determined on Tuesday that a weeknight would be best to have a meeting with regard to our policy, looking at what our policies are going to be on a number of issues. The OPEB investment committee, we need one more person on that, and I know Mr. Thomas said that he would like to serve on that. With regard to board reports, Mr. Mansour, anything to report on the Planning Commission?
So just a couple of quick things here. We've had a couple discussions about this so far. We last meeting was around the master plan and made a recommendation to the board, which they accepted tonight, which was great. Look forward to moving forward there. We also reviewed the 2018 report to the Planning Commission, which was also submitted, I believe, to the board as well. So that was the crux of the Planning Commission. Regarding Metro Alliance, there's going to be a public meeting, I believe, is actually scheduled for January 16th. And on that, we're going to be reviewing a 2017 through 2020 TIP proposal. And the good news is that there's the addition of a bridge rehabilitation over on Belsey Road over Thread Creek is included in that TIP proposal. Bad news is it's not scheduled till 2021. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Mansour. Mr. Thomas?
Parks and Rec would be...
What's going on with Parks and Rec?
Parks and Rec will be meeting next week, and I'd like to overstep my time here, but I read Ms. Schmidt's article yesterday, or this morning, about our council person, Jamie Weasel, resigning from the city board, and I just want to say to the record that I'm going to miss him. We worked together on the fire task force, and he was a very good council person, and we did the best that he could with the fire commission, and I really respect him, and that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Mr. Mansour?
So, because because we get a chance to talk about Parks and Rec here. Over the last 2 or 3 meetings, we've been, I think it was last fall, we kind of started bringing this thing up about the operating agreement that the current Parks and Rec is working under, how it is older than some of the members on this board, and made a request to have that rewritten. I think with all the other things that have been going on that may have been stalled, but I think that there's an important, this is an important time for us to get that underway, and especially with potential changes in the administration of the Parks and Rec that could have long-lasting effects, that we ought to be, you know, have something underway and make it understood that at the Parks and Rec that this operations agreement really ought to be in place before serious additional commitments are made in terms of either personnel, purchases, or other major commitments.
I think it would only be fair to the person that they would bring in, that they know. I mean, if we're looking at our operating agreement and we're looking at changing that, I think it's only fair to individuals that'd be considering that position to know what that operating agreement looks like and what we're willing to fund. To hire somebody just prior to having that agreement in place, or who knows how long it'll take to hammer that out, but if Ms. Edson's retiring immediately or whenever her time frame is, I see no reason why an interim person couldn't serve in that capacity until that agreement is hammered out. Is that what you're thinking, Mr. Mansour?
It is, but at the same time, I mean, it's just not that one issue. I mean, there's other things that go on all the time. They have plans to make major capital purchases. So my suggestion is that we, now that we've got our budget passed, now that we're moving forward on planning, or excuse me, the master plan, we've got that kind of behind us, that we dedicate some serious effort and really wrap this thing up in short order.
And like, I would like to schedule a separate meeting just for, and I talked to Mr. Thomas earlier this week, a separate meeting on a weeknight, and that's, we said on Tuesday that weeknights work better than a weekend, but I think we need to devote a meeting just to Parks and Recs, that we can hammer out some of our vision and our values that we outlined with the facilitator that we had last time, and follow up on getting that finished up. I think, Ms. Lane, do you have your hand?
Well, I did, but I was chair of the of the Parks and Rec Commission, and I want this board to remember the first Parks and Rec director was an employee of the school and the basketball coach, and that's how it got started with Chuck Creasy. When I was chairman, Chuck retired, and at that time it was the commission's desire that we go statewide and get applicants. And I don't know how to, if I could, Mr. Supervisor Bennett, I think that maybe direction should be given to the Parks and Rec Commission that they should be looking statewide for a director. We have a fire commission that are not elected but serve well. We have a Parks Commission that serves well, but we don't allow the Fire Commission to choose the fire chief. We don't allow the McFarland Library to choose. So I'm just saying, since this is still a new group with only 2 leaders, this might be something that the schools, now knowing that they have liability, and the city and that, you might want to look at how you want to hire a new director, because it's only the second one, and we did go statewide the first time around in order to do our due diligence.
Well, I think even before we make recommendations on how they go about hiring, we need to figure out what that operating agreement's going to even look like before they even get to that point, is my contention. But, and I think Mr. Mansour's as well.
Exactly right.
Mr. Thomas?
So for some education, the Parks and Rec Commission, according to the agreement that we're working on currently, hires their director. We do not have a say-so as a board. And the Parks Commission hires it, and it's in their bylaws that they would post the job, but they can change that when they so see fit. What I would like to see happen is that maybe Attorney Laddie, I've spoken with, to the attorney and also with the supervisor, maybe could put something together where explaining our
concerns.
Our concerns, and Attorney Laddie, why don't you?
Yeah, and I'm happy to pick up with that.
Thank
because
you.
Because we, as a board, had a discussion about that agreement, and the Parks and Rec Commission they themselves had generated some proposed changes to that agreement. I reached out to the city attorney, Walt Griffin, and also the school's attorney, Gary Collins, and told them that we had concerns along employment issues, employment liability issues, long-term obligation issues as far as OPEB and other employment matters, and also premises liability issues. And I received some comments back that both attorneys were going to meet with their respective clients and discuss our concerns. And they shared with me that their clients do share those concerns as our agreement currently stands, but also under the current operations or administrative operations of Parks and Rec Commission. I'm perfectly happy to, and Mr. Mansour was right. We seem to get busy with other things, but I think this thing has moved itself up to the front burner because we've heard that there is an imminent change, I think, to the leadership position at Parks and Rec. And so I'm happy to, first of all, communicate to those three attorneys that we want to discuss and hopefully finalize any changes to that Parks and Rec agreement that are proposed from either of the three parties before they go ahead and make some significant personnel change or capital purchase. And if I know that you guys haven't discussed it consensus-wise all the way down the table, but I'm getting the impression that you as a board may say to the Parks and Rec Commission and the City Council and the school board that you would like to have not necessarily a moratorium or a freeze, but you would like to have the agreement brought to the forefront before there are any significant personnel or capital changes.
Which would be a moratorium, basically, wouldn't it?
Well,
Yes.
And here's the thing, you're one-third partner in this agreement, and as it currently stands, they have the ability, the commission has their ability to make personnel decisions. You, theoretically, you and the schools and the city each have a vote, a one-third vote on the budget of the Parks and Rec. In my mind, if there is a request by consensus by the township board and the city and or the schools to say, look, we're the ones that approve your budget, we're the ones that administer your budget, we want you to take a break in your administrative process until we can catch our breath on the agreement, that seems to me like it would carry some weight.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Massey had his hand up.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can anyone tell me the last time that agreement was updated?
Never.
Mr.
1970.
Hardly ever.
It goes back to
1970.
It's
early.
older than the
Mr. Laird.
fire commission agreement.
Okay,
Yeah.
if that, which I do believe what you guys just said, who in their right mind would use the agreement that was made before I was born?
Now,
Yes. There you go, you're attacking me.
Well,
I didn't say a word.
This is an operation thing.
Right.
Supervisor
Yes.
Bennett.
Mr. Mansour.
And I appreciate Trustee Massey's sense of humor on this, but I wasn't referring to him as the person that the agreement was older to do that.
Lonnie and I.
It was probably closer to Lonnie, but nonetheless, just going back to some old information. So the census count for Grand Blanc Township was just over 19,000 residents in 1970.
19,000 residents in
19,000
1970.
in 1970, and so now we're writing somewhere between 37, 38,000. So here we are, we've doubled in our demographics here, and so it certainly makes a lot of sense that we get this thing recalibrated for where we are today.
Yep.
Let's not forget, we do have over
but-
$1 million budget through the Parks and Rec.
Right.
Yeah. So let me just Ms. Lane?
I'll just make
We
a
don't-
historical
don't
comment.
No.
Let's
I mean,
figure out where we're at.
the first director, as a reminder, Chuck Creasy, all of his benefits, all of his wages were what the school put in besides the use of their premises. So we never had to deal with that or even really think a lot about it when we went to our statewide search for a new director. And so I really, being there at that time, I would strongly urge the city, the schools, and the township to look at the hiring and everything
Yeah.
before we get into a new one.
Well-
I totally believe the good that Kay has done, but I agree with you, Mr. Mansour, and I simply wanted to say that from the first to the second, there was, not, I mean, we went statewide, but we didn't go in depth with it because we were more of a community and not.
Well,
you know.
a lot of things have changed since then, so we're gonna be
Right,
looking
I
at a
totally
lot of
agree.
things. But anyways, is there a consensus on this board that we would like to ask Mr. Laddie, I know, to communicate our concerns
Yes.
with the other two entities that
Yes.
we would like to hold off, and, I mean, with the fire department, we ask that the commission not commit themselves to any purchase of fire equipment or major fire equipment until we have figured out what direction we're going in. I think this is a very similar situation in that we're asking that no commitments are made or attempt to make a commitment are made until we figure out where we're going.
I will convey that. If that is a consensus, I'll
That's
convey it
right.
tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Anybody
I would-
opposed to that?
I would like it more than an ask. I'd like it more of a legal.
That we're
Request.
Yeah,
requesting
can
that?
we legally stop it?
Well, I don't think we have a legal, as I expressed, I don't think technically right now we have a legal basis to stop them from carrying on. But again, and this is something, maybe, I mean, I'm a lawyer, but this is something that, if you follow the money, that's usually where you have to have decision-making input. And it doesn't make sense to me that if the fire commission said, and a fully voluntary agreement between three parties, forget you guys, we're headed off on our own direction, that seems very short-sighted to me. But as far as the timing, one of the issues that we all had in common was the employer liability issues. And this is a perfect time for us
I
to
agree.
express our concerns as the three participating municipalities
Right.
and ask our respective representatives to keep that in mind and let us get that issue for sure and other issues out of the way before we move forward on a long-term path, which is what looks like we're at the precipice of that.
Mr. Thomas?
Well, one thing we have to realize too, through you, Chair, to Attorney Laddie, is that the fire department works for us, works for the Grand Blanc Township. The Parks Commission, their employees work for the Park Commission.
That's true, but that'll be the next question that comes at you,
Exactly.
is how do you want to handle that?
That's
Because
my,
when we had, the reason, and this is interesting, we have a lot of the same issues that happened with the fire commission, but the fire commission, we didn't have a recognized employer for the fire commission until our last agreement in 2010. The statute requires one of the participating municipalities to be officially the employer of record. I have concerns from a liability standpoint, and I would think the city and the schools would as well, because there is no official employer of the Parks and Rec Commission. And the Parks and Rec Commission is an interesting intergovernmental entity that doesn't have standalone authority. And so if you say, I work for the Grand Lake Parks and Rec Commission, legally speaking, you don't have an employer that has the full faith and credit of the government. You don't work for a standalone legal entity. That should be a concern for everybody, employees as well. Now, you got to think about how you want to solve that, because we found ourselves with the added responsibility and cost of being the employer of the fire commission. You can imagine that the same sorts of issues will follow for whoever's the employer of record for Parks and Rec.
Ms. Lane?
But again, historically, recently, we went ahead and we became the employer for the fire department. And
but from the very beginning, from when we went with Jim Harms, it was the city and the township had a joint meeting and chose the fire chief. We didn't let the fire commission or any other group make that decision for us. It was the city and the township made that selection from the very beginning.
Well, that's why the agreement that we have is so
Yeah.
critical, because
Right.
maybe
So we
that, but that
have
isn't
a
the way it's spelled out.
Consensus, I think, and
Mr.
so we should
Manswer?
maybe move on to the next topic.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a consensus. Mr.
Absolutely.
Laddie's going to
Absolutely.
act on that and communicate our concern and our desire. Mr. Massey, Fire Commission? Okay. And Mr. Atkins, anything with regard to Zoning Board of Appeals?
Nothing to report.
Okay, Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, nothing.
Okay. Just a couple of quick things that I haven't mentioned already during the meeting. I'm sorry, Ms. Lane?
Historically.
I'm ahead of you.
Okay.
But I have no report tonight, sir, so you may
Okay.
take my 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Just real quick, the DDA will be meeting again next week. We've received interim plan, and we will be reviewing that and moving forward in the next month on that plan. Our board members on the DDA are mulling it over this month, and will report back. We've asked them to forward any changes that they would suggest. And I believe, Mr. Limita, the plan will be coming to this board. What's the time frame that we're looking at for this board to receive that?
So we anticipate that next Tuesday, the DDA board will either approve as amended now, or they'll amend it again and approve it. You'll have it before you on January 22nd meeting with the request that you would set a public hearing date for March 26th if you accept the DDA plan as presented.
Okay.
What was that date again in March?
March 26th, we'd have to have it advertised by the 6th, I believe.
Correct.
Supervisor Bennett?
Yes.
Could we, I guess maybe not, now is not the exact perfect time, but can we think about what kind of a regular report back cadence that we would request
Receive
the
from the
DG?
DDA?
Yeah, quarterly, or I mean, or whatever.
Sure. We can, any suggestions, Mr. Laddie?
No, but I will carry that forward to the DDA. We currently have, I mean, we've only met officially twice, and they hit the ground running with a draft of the DDA, or the development plan and the TIF plan, at I think their second official meeting. And so I'm happy to bring that up with Superintendent Limita's help to figure out what sort of reporting they want to do and what intervals they want to do it. But the whole thing, by the way, I mean, the whole thing is really taken off at a rocket's pace, and so they kind of haven't had a chance to really catch their breath.
So the minutes for the DDA, has our board received those? I know I get them, but I wasn't sure if.
Nope.
So that would be something that we could.
That's fine, and what I
Forward to our
have
board.
done is, we're going to adopt our second, well, we have one official set of minutes, and then we have a
Draft.
pending set, and the clerk's office will have a file to maintain those adopted records. Just as an aside, since I'm the one that's putting those minutes together, you're going to see quite a contrast between what you see at this board and what you see at the DDA. But that doesn't mean that information can't be fleshed out, the documents can't be produced, and as much information as you want, we can get you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Laddie.
Picking on Kathy.
So the DDA's moving forward at a feverish pace, and we're going to hopefully have some great things to report. Mr. Laddie, anything that you'd like to discuss?
Nothing to add, thank you.
We will need an executive session, closed session. I don't know what the proper term is. I don't want to get it confused with executive committee, but we'll have an executive session. How's that?
And the purpose of that will be to discuss an individual employment agreement.
Okay. Mr. Limita?
Just a couple things for the board. We're currently, the staff is going through their performance appraisals and performance evaluation for 2018. Everyone will have those completed to me by the end of this month. We'll go through a review, and then I would anticipate that in the first meetings in February, the board will hear my report on the overall performance evaluations, and the board can then determine whether or not they will be making any changes to merit increases to wage adjustments, but it will be a full slate of everybody at one time, as we discussed last year. Today I was lucky enough to take a tour of the new Magna facility on South Holly Road. I've got to tell you, that thing is just amazing. That building is so cool and state-of-the-art. I wish I would have taken some pictures just to share with the board, but as they complete it, they've already said that we can get in there and get some pictures of it before they completely take it over, and you guys get your tour in there. It's just so amazing. You just got to see the things that they're doing in there. It's just fabulous. It's just fantastic. What a great addition to Grand Blanc Township. I also sat in this week on an economic development meeting at the Flint Genesee Chamber, actually in the Ferris Wheel building in Flint. The Detroit Chamber and a group of CEOs, a lot of the big three automotive CEOs, they've been working on this thing where they do economic development around Detroit. They're trying to expand it, so they've recruited a executive director out of Richmond, Virginia, and this is the first kickoff tour that came around. I was able to represent Grand Blanc Township there. Interesting meeting. It's going to be called the Detroit Regional Partnership. They're going to represent 11 county consortium of everybody to really represent Southeast Michigan and what we can do to spur economic development. So that was a good meeting. And then just as an aside, our mechanic, not Steve, but Ken, we regretfully lost him. Last Friday was his last day. He went back to his prior employer. Good mechanics are hard to come by. He was a fantastic mechanic. He's going to be tough to replace. They came back and offered him nearly $4 more than we were paying to recruit him back. We've had him here for just about 2 years, just shy of 2 years, and so it's a tough one. We've got ads out there. We've got some in, but if anybody knows a good mechanic, especially with somebody who has heavy truck experience, it would be fantastic if they forwarded their resume. We're a great place to work. That's it.
Yes,
Can
Mr.
I make
Mansur?
just one comment here? Maybe before we take a second to go into executive session, maybe Clerk Lane can finalize the
Mr. Harlequin, or Mr. Williams?
Yes, so he doesn't have to wait till.
Right. So when we go into executive session, what you're asking, we take a couple minutes so Ms. Lane can meet with Mr. Williams and
Sign off the paperwork.
get the paperwork appropriate. Okay, anything else, Mr. Limita?
That's it.
Okay, what we will do is entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss
So moved.
employment contract. Been motion supported.
Aye.
All right.
Ms. Lane? We need to do a roll call vote.
Not ready. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, my brain's gone. Mr. Mansur?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Buzak?
Yes.
Mr. Mansur?
Yes.
Myself, and Supervisor.
Yes. Okay, we will convene our executive session in just 5 minutes, or as soon as...